getting questions live or through the chat?
Either is fine.
Okay. Well, since the recording has begun and our session has officially started, I'd like to welcome everyone to our session. This is track 3, environmental justice, impact, and disaster response. This morning, actually, we have 4 presentations on this panel, and we'll go in order of what is provided in the conference program. The first presentation that we'll have today is called Disaster Preparedness Information Seeking Behavior Among Latinos, Developing a Better Understanding of Factors that Lead to Reducing Vulnerability. The second presentation is entitled Policy Communities and Natural Disasters, Cyclone Elaine and Idai in Zimbabwe. Our third presentation is titled Impacts of Climate Change, Hurricane and Sea Level Rise on Minority Communities in the Northern Gulf of Mexico region. And finally, our last presentation is titled An Analysis of Cryptocurrency Mining and the Associated Effects of Rising Energy Prices and Public Health Risks in the State of Texas. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone to this session. As our presentations go forward, if I would ask that you keep your mics on mute, so that way any noise in the background is cut off for the recording. Also, I would ask that if you do have questions throughout the course of the presentations, if you could please place them in the chat box, and I'll go back to those at the end of the session and direct them either at the entire panel, or if you have questions that are more direct for individuals, I will do that as well. So without further ado, I am going to start today's panel presentation, and we'll move right along. So let me share my screen. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Thank you. So good morning again, everyone. My name is Jason Rivera. I'm an associate professor of public management at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And I'm presenting research with Dr. Brittany Hupp at Virginia Commonwealth University. Our research today is going to discuss disaster preparedness seeking information behavior, particularly among Latinos throughout the United States. So when we talk about disaster resilience, when we talk about emergency management, one of the things that is continually discussed as an exceedingly important factor in people's ability to be resilient, to recover from disasters in the future, is their disaster preparedness, not only at the community level, but more importantly at the individual level. And so understanding when and how people access information and the way in which they access information about disaster preparedness is exceedingly important. A lot of research shows that when individuals are exposed to information about disaster preparedness, there's a correlation between, a positive correlation, between their decision to engage in preparedness and even mitigation behaviors. Now, when we talk about disaster preparedness information, generally speaking, understanding people's access to this is exceedingly important for enhancing social equity. There's a number, within public administration and also within emergency management literature, the notion of access and people's access to not only information, but a wide range of resources is what stands the difference between someone recovering or not recovering in some cases, but also understanding how people access information leads us to engage and develop better information or crisis information dissemination strategies. Finally, where the disaster literature exists around information seeking behavior, it's predominantly or exclusively oriented towards generally disaster information seeking behavior, meaning information about the impending doom that's coming at you at a particular time, or what you can do prior to or immediately at or when a disaster is about to occur or a hazard is about to occur, not necessarily oriented towards understanding how people access preparedness information. So there's a lack of literature there. On top of that, there is almost no literature exclusively oriented at a national or even regional level that looks at what how Latinos themselves and among this ethnic group access or seek information. So this study here is really starting to explore how Latinos seek information that's specifically oriented to disaster preparedness. Now, when we talk about the information seeking behavior, we're looking at 3 different types of behavior. We're looking at attending a public meeting on disaster preparedness. And today, typically, we've traditionally thought about this in relation to going to an in-person workshop or an in-person town hall meeting. But now, since COVID, many of these things have transitioned to a virtual format where you have the opportunity to interface and deliberate with people in real time. Another information seeking behavior is active, independent searching for information. Now, this can occur across a wide range of media, but this is when a person individually chooses in their spare time or because they are personally motivated to search out, for example, television shows or documentaries related to disaster preparedness. They look things up on the internet. They call respective emergency management actors or responders that they know to gain that information. Or they even look up particular entities, actors, or even people in their own social network that are on social media and talking about these things. And finally is their interaction with others. People seek information when they go out and actively engage with potentially their neighbors or their immediate social network to talk about what is going on in relation to disaster preparedness. Now, as I had mentioned before, a great deal of the research that deals with information seeking behavior is oriented to information seeking behavior more generally, as opposed to preparedness. There is also a lot of research that's related to disaster information seeking behavior that's oriented towards what people do in the aftermath of disaster, right? So how can they access disaster recovery resources or where they can access these resources? Now, this literature helps to inform what we may or may not see in relation to disaster preparedness information seeking behavior. So when we're looking at, well, what may potentially influence this behavior, we're looking at previous disaster experience, right? Have they experienced a disaster in the past that may encourage them or disincentivize them to actually go out and seek this type of information? And really, when the literature talks about this, they're talking about this notion of not only their experience, but also their perceived risk to natural or some other type of hazard, and subsequently their vulnerability to these things as well. They talk about their preparedness efficacy, right? So the preparedness efficacy is the notion of, if I engage in disaster preparedness behavior, I am confident that this will actually reduce the damages to my home or increase the likelihood of me being able to be resilient or recover from a disaster. And so people's perception of the value of the behavior and what comes from going and learning about preparedness is exceedingly important. The literature also indicates that when someone engages in one type of information seeking behavior, for example, attending a meeting, they're also inclined to engage in other types of information seeking behavior. So for example, if they go out to a meeting, they're also more inclined to go speak to their neighbor or someone in their personal network about disaster preparedness. Primary language. This really has to do with access or language access, right? Does someone speak or or is their primary language English in this case within the United States, which will provide them the opportunity or an increased opportunity to engage in more interactive types of information seeking behaviors, such as attending a meeting or speaking to others in their neighborhood, especially if they are in more heterogeneous neighborhoods that don't necessarily speak similar languages. Then there's home ownership, and this has to really do with whether or not someone has a vested interest in getting prepared, right? Is someone's assets, in this case their home, will that provoke them to engage in these types of behaviors? And then finally, there's a lot of literature out there that talks about demographic characteristics and how that may or may not affect people's inclination to engage in some of these information-seeking behaviors. However, on some of these issues, there is not consensus at all, right? So for example, race, there really isn't a consensus on how racial categories may or may not affect information seeking behavior. As far as ability status, there isn't any consensus one way or another. A lot of studies find there's a positive, others find there's a negative, and some find that there is absolutely no relationship between these types of behaviors and ability. And so again, this research sought to explore what these relationships, if any, may exist. So in order to complete our study, we engage in an analysis of FEMA's 2020 National Household Survey. This survey has been running annually since 2007. It really measures people's perceptions, behavior, attitudes around disaster preparedness and mitigation strategies. Now, we disaggregated the data to specifically look at Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish-speaking respondents. And I want to use that phrase very explicitly, and that's how FEMA measures their Latino population, for good or bad. Now, sampling weights were used to adjust for non-response bias and also and issues related to selection across all demographic and geographic locations throughout the country. Our sample that we used for the analysis was utilized 981 individuals, and this sample reflects the US adult Latino population. We created 4 different dependent variables, 3 of which are categorical variables ranging from 1 to 3 to measure the extent of which someone would engage in each one of these information-seeking behaviors that we had previously mentioned. We created a continuous dependent variable to look at the general information-seeking behavior as a whole. So not only looking at specifically what influences each one of these behaviors discretely, we looked at, well, as a whole of this information-seeking behaviors, what encourages that. And then we controlled for the demographic and other variables that we had mentioned previously. Again, we used OLS regression on the continuous variable and ordered logistic regression on the categorical. So instead of blinding you with a table that typically no one can see, I kind of just showed, we just depict the relationships that we observed in relation to each one of the models. So the first model looked at the general preparedness information seeking behavior. This is the continuous variable. And what we found was that there's a positive relationship between someone's prior disaster experience, their level of preparedness efficacy, and their income in relation to whether or not they engage in these behaviors. However, we saw a negative statistical relationship between someone that also a Latino that identified as Native American or Alaska Native with all information seeking behaviors. Now, in relation to attending an actual disaster preparedness meeting, we found that, again, when they go or when someone goes to one type of or engages in one type of information seeking behavior, it has a positive influence on their inclination to go to others. So as you can see, talking to others about preparedness and also seeking out information affected their attendance at a meeting. And also identifying if a Latino identified as being Alaskan, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander, this also had a positive influence. And as you can see with the other, and because of time, I'm kind of rushing through this, but as you can see with the other types of disaster preparedness information seeking behavior, you consistently see the engagement in one behavior having a positive influence on their engagement in another. However, what's interesting about talking to others is that individuals that, again, identified as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, Native American, or Alaskan Native, there was a negative relationship associated or observed with their information seeking behavior. And then finally, speaking to others, or individually seeking out information, again, engagement in the other behaviors, but then also the level of disaster preparedness efficacy, English as a primary language, and someone's age were all positively associated with that behavior. Now, what can we take from this? Well, some of this information provides us the opportunity to develop more equitable crisis communication strategies around reaching the Latino population. Latinos are typically within the literature described as being less prepared for natural hazards than their white or even African-American counterparts. And so how do you get this information out to people that's going to be utilized? How do you increase people's efficacy in these activities so they will be more inclined to go out there? However, how do we increase people's disaster preparedness? Although we are saying, or what we look at today is how do you seek this information, we haven't really looked at, well, does this actual engagement in information seeking behavior lead to disaster preparedness actual activities, right? And so we need to see how that is connected. Now, for future research, in addition to that, we also have to tease out, well, what are the ethnic differentiations between nationalities, for example. Latino is not a monolithic type of description when we talk about this community, right? A number of sociological studies have pointed out that different cultural or different socialization to natural hazards leads to different types of behaviors. So one thing that we would like to do in the future is potentially see how do people that are, for example, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, Mexican, etc., are there differences in the way they access disaster preparedness information? And again, as I mentioned earlier, does this lead to differences in actual disaster preparedness activities? Thank you. And with that, I will stop my session. So our next presenter is going to be Bismarck, and he is going to talk about policy communities and natural disasters, Cyclone Elaine and Ida in Zimbabwe. And he has asked me to share his presentation. Can everyone see that? Okay, great.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay, so here we have a power challenge in Zimbabwe, and I'm in the dark. I actually drove some kilometers to find where I can, for a place where I can find network. So I will turn off my video if it is okay with you. Okay, thank you very much. So we can go on the next slide. Thank you. Also, as you have seen on the first page, that the title of my presentation is Police Communities and Natural Disasters, Cyclone Idai and Elaine in Zimbabwe. I'll first look at the introduction, the overview of the presentation. It has the introduction, conceptual consideration, police community in Cyclone Idai, and Cyclone Elene, then the conclusion. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so why did I focus on Cyclone Elene and Cyclone Idai? Cyclone Elene took place in the early 2000s, and it was one of the biggest, or one of the cyclones that had the largest scale and magnitude in terms of destruction, and also in terms of the cost that it had on the Zimbabwean society and the Zimbabwean government itself. Cyclone Elene left a devastating trail of about $20 million, and approximately 120 people were said to have lost their lives. And Cyclone Idai took place in 2019. It took place in the same area of Chimanimani, which is in Manicaland province. So in Zimbabwe, Manicaland province is a province that is vulnerable to cyclones and natural disasters. Now, considering how this issue has become an urgent in this day and time, there is need for us to interrogate on what possible measures can be done in order for us to mitigate some of these cyclones. So in doing so, I realized that there is a missing link, there is a gap in terms of the communities themselves and the players and the actors that are involved in disaster management. This is why I chose to undertook a study or research that goes beyond the natural disaster analysis on its own, but look at the police communities, the actors involved, the interests that are served by the disaster management mechanism or policies, proposals, and responses that are being put in place. So that's why we have to interrogate it from a police community perspective. So let us go to the next slide. So I'll first start by explaining what a natural disaster is, but I'm not going to take much of your time here because I believe all of us, we understand what a natural disaster is. So a natural disaster denotes an atmospheric or event. It can be in form of a windstorm, earthquake, tsunami, landslide, drought, or flood, anything that has a potential to cause destruction. So if we are to go by that definition on its own, we already see that cyclones, they are classified as natural disasters. So what it means in this regard is that are they qualified to be studied or to be analyzed under the prism of natural disasters? And then the other conceptual consideration that we have police communities. So when we talk of a police community, according to Pross stated that a police community is part of a political system that has acquired a dominant voice in determining government decision in a field of a public policy. So a police community, this can be the media, pressure group, individuals, government agencies, or anyone that is involved in the police or that has an interest in the police that is being undertaken. Then we have what we call police networks. So police networks are found in the police community. But the difference between police networks and police community is that police networks and police networks are activated by a certain policy, or the network itself within the police community is promoted by an issue of interest, an issue that becomes of interest to various actors. Then they form a network. For example, let's say we are talking about disaster management in the whole country, for example, of Zimbabwe, right? There are actors within the media fraternity, within the academics, within the civil society organization that are interested in disaster management. That becomes a network. So these networks, and then we have what we call police subsystems. Police subsystems, but these ones now, I think I'll just skip them because they are not in the Zimbabwean context, they are not actually a very popular. They are more popular in the American public administration, American police communities. So I'll just skip them for the sake of this presentation. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So on the police communities, we have what we call the sub-government and the attentive public. The sub-government, this is what I might term the strategic apex in terms of police formulation and police decision. And it is in this sub-government where police decisions are made. It is in the sub-government where decisions on which policy or which action to be implemented are taken. The sub-government in Zimbabwe in terms of natural disaster management is made up of the Office of the President, the Cabinet, and then we have the Ministry of Local Governance and Public Works, which is the ministry that is responsible for the Department of Civil Protection Unit. So we have the third one, which is the Department of Civil Protection. The Department of Civil Protection is housed within the Ministry of Local Governance and Public Works. So the Office of the President and Cabinet, whenever there is a cyclone, for example, in Cyclone Eline and Cyclone Idai, it plays what is known as a meta-governance role. It oversees everything that is happening or that is transpiring within the whole time or the whole disaster management framework or the whole disaster management time. But the challenge that is there is that usually this office is not informed of everything that is happening on the ground in terms of the impact, the scale and its magnitude, the religion of the people or certain things, that social norms that have to be respected. Usually they are not informed. The Office of the President Cabinet is mainly concerned usually in dealing with the disaster. For example, we've seen it in Cyclone Idai, Cyclone Eline. What they did is that they came in and they gave a directive to move people from the areas that they were affected in without considering the social and the cultural implications. Zimbabwe is a very cultural nation, and people, they don't just move from their ancestral land to another land without a proper reason. If you try to do that, they consider it, one, as a taboo and also as a violation of their cultural rights. Then in Cyclone Idai, we also realized that the same office did not realize its mistakes. So it learned nothing and forgotten nothing because they handled the disaster the same way that they did in Cyclone Eline of 2001. Then we have the Ministry of Local Governance and Public Works. This is the ministry that is responsible for the Department of the Civil Protection, which is actually the department that is responsible for disaster management. From your presentation, I have learned that in the United States of America, you have FEMA. So the Department of Civil Protection Unit is just like FEMA, but it's housed within the Ministry of Local Governance. So the Ministry of Local Governance now, the department only has the Department of Civil Protection Unit only has 4 employees. And it is expected to undertake disaster management interventions across the entire nation. But this department, what it does now, it coordinates other smaller departments. For example, the health the health department in local authorities, or the police in the local areas, the military again in the local areas. But the challenge that always comes usually here is that within the security sectors, the military and the police, they seem to neglect the orders and the decision by the people that are actually heading the Department of Civil Protection, which in this case will be the district administrators for the district where the intervention is being implemented. But again, now in the sub-government is that the sub-government always advances interest, its own interests, the interests which majority of the citizens and the people really wonder if they have even undertaken public hearings and consultative forums to ask people. Then we have the attentive public now. On the attentive public, usually the attentive public is made of community members, civil society organization, international players, private players. We have the media, the academia. And then this is one of the most interesting development in the African literature, particularly something that I learned when I was undertaking a research on the effect of Cyclone Idai. So if I finish or if I try to go without giving special attention to indigenous knowledge, please just remind me to talk about it. So we have the community members. Community members now, these are the people that live within the area that has been affected by the disaster. But these people now, they know better how to circumvent some of these challenges, but they might not have the technical ability to undertake certain things. And they also know in terms of the interests and the things that they want. So the challenge that we have here is that their voice are not respected, or they're not given chance to speak when it comes to policy formulation and policy intervention. The same apply with civil society organization, international player and private players. Here, the challenge that happens now is that the government wants the money from the civil society, international organization, private player, but it does not want to give them a voice in speaking and advancing their interests, also the interests of the people that they will be propagating. Then we have the media. The media plays a very crucial role, both in the Cyclone Edwin and Cyclone Idai, because the media was there to expose some of the corrupt activities and everything that the government was neglecting to do, which they had promised the citizens that they were going to do. Then we also have the academia. The academia is very critical because it provides, it creates ground and room for evidence-based advocacy. They undertake researches that unearth police anomalies and give probably organic and actionable recommendation. Then we have the indigenous knowledge. Now, this is the most controversial pillar in the attentive public. Why? Because people, they do not want to accept that this is what is happening. But from the people who live in Chimani in the Manicaland area, they are of the view that Cyclone Idai was caused by, was more spiritual than it was the physical, because these people, they have the indigenous beliefs that they have that way in alignment with everything that transpired during the Cyclone Idai. And there are allegations that there are certain individuals, prophets, spirit mediums who had come and warned the government and even the people within that the disaster was going to take place before it even took place. This was probably 3, 4, 5 months ago. So, but now the challenge that is there is that the indigenous knowledge pillar, they do not have the scientific evidence to advance their interest when policies are being formulated. They do not have the scientific evidence to promote or to be listened to. Everyone who engage or interact with them think that they're crazy. We can go to the next slide. So the next slide is just a conclusion on what takes precedence in disaster management and interventions in Zimbabwe in terms of police interest, whose interests are being advanced. Generally, I'll just conclude and say the interest of the sub-government, which is made up of the Office of the President Cabinet, the Ministry of Local Governance and Public Works, and the Department of the Civil Protection Unit, are the interests that are being served. And that's the reason why we have an ineffective disaster management, because the people, they feel like they do not own the policy and they are not consulted when the policies are being formulated. So they are not participating freely and fully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bismarck. Now, our next presentation is going to be on the impacts of climate change, hurricane, and sea level rise in minority communities. I'm going to place pin. While our next presenter is queuing up their presentation on the shared screen, I just want to say we are going to have an additional presentation that is not on the program today by Edmund Merriman. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And that individual will go as our last presentation. So
Thank you very
please.
much.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Good morning. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. My name is Jae-Young Ko. I'm a faculty member at the JS Department of Public Policy and Administration. And I have been teaching and conducting research on urban management, environmental policy, and natural resource management. And my presentation topic is the impact of climate change, hurricane, and sea level rise on minority communities in the northern Gulf of Mexico. Nowadays, we talk a lot about climate change and why the climate change is happening. I believe that is related to our continued increase in population, GDP, energy use, and other economic activities. As you see from the figure, a lot of figures showing that all is increasing trend. Why is it possible? Because we depend on the energies, especially on fossil fuels, like coal, crude oil, like that. And as the figure shows that there is a high level of correlation between per capita GDP on x-axis and per capita energy consumption on y-axis. So without energy, you cannot make economic progress at all. The problem is that we depend heavily on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are chemical compounds of hydrogen and oxygen. So when burning, a chemical compound produces carbon dioxide. Then carbon dioxide is a global warming gas. So accumulated global warming gas have caused the climate change. Then the climate change having a lot of negative impact in many different sides. One, of course, increased temperature. Two, increasing heat waves, also accelerating sea level rise, and hurricanes become more powerful, and extreme precipitation events has been occurring more frequently, and now uninhabitable areas on the earth has been increasing, and we are spending trillions of dollars in terms of the damage cost. In terms of sea level rise, the NOAA figure showing that the estimated sea level rise along the US coast. According to NOAA's estimation, the sea level rise along the US coast will be about 12 inches by 2050. So a lot of people cannot live in their home anymore when they live along the US coast. And Lovely saying that there are two grand paradigms moving in handling climate change. One is Malthusian dynamics. People enjoy their life as much as they can until the big disaster hits. And then another one is Dionisian dynamic of innovations, that how to handle this challenge, right? That is, in other words, confronted with challenges of climate change, how can we respond to that challenge will decide our future. And more specifically, what are the impacts of climate change to minority communities? To name a few, I will say increasing gentrification pressure, moving out, increasing housing insurance rate, and flooding insurance premium increase. All right, the table shows population change, Black population, white population, and median income change from 1920 to 1929 for a single census tract in the Miami area. As you see that total population in the census tract has increased over the time. In that 2010, the population was 3,019, now 3,559 in 2019. How about the Black population? It started with 345. Now just 86 people remain there. Clear significant decrease in terms of residential Black population. How about the white population? It was 2,535. Now is estimated as 2,952, a significant increase in white residential population. So how about the income level? It has the track showing that increasing trend for the people living in the census tract. So to me, that is empirical evidence of ongoing gentrification in the Miami area, also the other areas in coastal zone. So that it means poor minority people, it has been pushed to move out from their homes, and middle class or upper income level white communities are moving in this area. Like all the time, they had a house along the beach line, but their housing has been inundated or damaged by hurricanes, others. So the people decide to move inland or higher land. So the consequence over the last 10 years shown in this table. Different demographic changes between white and poor and economic activities. Also, the other one is showing population change in New Orleans area. Okay, after Hurricane Katrina, population has recovered, but now again, New Orleans area has been losing population. Some middle-class people are moving out from New Orleans, moving into the other side of Lake Pontchartrain, like Covington and Hammond. They are the two cities, the fast-growing cities in New Orleans, in Louisiana. So another one is the New Orleans has been challenged by providing enough number of affordable housing units. So it will cause another negative impact to minority people living in New Orleans area. Because of increasing hurricanes, increase the risk of flooding, home insurance market in Louisiana, maybe similar in Florida, collapsed. Like in Louisiana, virtually there's no private home insurance company anymore. Most of them closed their business and moved out from state of Louisiana. And another concern is federal flooding insurance program. The FEMA updated their flooding insurance program, so-called FEMA Risk Rating 2.0 program, right? Here is one example showing that one family has been paying $500 a year for flooding insurance, but now they are asked to pay $500 a month. So the consequence is that the total number of NFIP policies declined by nearly 9%, right? Between 1 year, 2021 to 2022. So now even middle-class people living in coastal zone cannot afford flooding insurance. There's a big headache to the people living in coastal zone. Then, now it's quite clear that gentrification and buyouts would happen more frequently in the near future in the coastal zone, and out migration would happen on a bigger scale. Then how local government, state government, even minority community leaders can handle these challenges? Well, at this moment, I cannot give you a more specific idea to handle the issues, but this moment I would like to say inclusive planning is the key. Currently, the Afro-Americans are disproportionately underrepresented in state and local planning activities. And their vulnerability tends to be more easily dismissed because no action, no participation, there are no responses from government, right? So by conducting higher inclusive planning, we can reduce the vulnerability of minority communities against the event related to climate change. That's what I think this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Now we'll move on to our next presentation on analysis of cryptocurrency mining. And the associated effects of rising energy prices.
Hi, this is Janice Upshaw. How are you all today? I have trying to see which of my screens will work with sharing. And is that sharing? Did that
Yes,
work?
it is.
Good. Well, good morning. I guess it's still morning where I'm where I live, but I wanted to talk with you all today about the cryptocurrency mining industry and its impact. We did a study here on its impact in Texas. However, in doing that study, we did research as to how this impacts us on a global scale. So I think you will find it of interest. I teach at the University of North Texas at Dallas in the School of Public Leadership. And this particular topic was brought to me by a group of 4 students, Brandy Phillips, Teresa Tumini, and Claude Whitson. And these students were very excited about it, and I was not, because I did not understand what cryptocurrency, the relationship it had with public service. And I thought they were wanting to talk about investment. And for any of you who are here thinking we're going to talk about crypto mining currency and its investment, that's not the case. And so this was new information for me, a new topic that we delved into and have been studying now for the past 18 months. And I found it surprising and fascinating, and definitely something that public leaders around the world are looking at and studying. So I hope you find it interesting. It may be a new topic for all of you as well. Just a little bit of background, because cryptocurrency is one of those, it's a new industry, and it's something that a lot of us aren't quite familiar with. It just seems like some kind of new age idea that's out there. And for those in my generation, we're like, just another trend or whatever. However, that does not seem to be the case because of the impact that does have on society. So the way that cryptocurrency works, it's not regulated, centrally regulated, like many of the systems, financial systems that we have. For instance, here in the US, we all of our currency is regulated centrally by the federal government. We utilize banks. It's very much something you can touch and feel and is insured. And the cryptocurrency industry is not. So in order to ascertain who has what and what amounts, there are all across the world, there are ledgers that are digital ledgers, which are following the cryptocurrency industry and where it goes. So for instance, if Billy were to sell Teresa 10 Bitcoins, which is a form of digital currency, for $10,000, but then 5 years later, he says, no, I only sold you 6 and I still should have 4. There's not a bank that they could go to for records, but there is a ledger on the web that is being kept by literally millions of users. And so that's referred to as the blockchain. I give you this just to kind of give you a little bit of insight as to how this works. So this digital ledger is what is keeping track of all the cryptocurrency around the world. So that's one of the pieces of information that will help you in this presentation. The other is what's called cryptocurrency mining. And this takes place, it can take place on a cell phone, it can take place on a personal computer, it can take place on a high capacity processor. And when you do cryptocurrency mining, you are solving mathematical equations that are provided every 10 minutes across the world. And if you were the first to solve the equation, you were paid in digital coin. So it's how you can acquire this digital coin is through mining. And that's the reference is cryptocurrency mining. So the last piece of information is sort of what I mentioned before, is that computers solve these mathematical problems. They get a reward, which is one of these blocks, this digital block. And the proof of stake happens when these awards delegate the tokens they own to the network. And that way it is secured as to whose crypto currency, where it belongs. So it's sort of this process where there's a request, this little digital block, which we put here as an actual cube, but it's not what it looks like, but it's digital. And this block is then sent to every node in a network. And the node validates the transaction. And then someone receives their crypto, and all of these blocks are added together, and they're what's referred to as the blockchain, if you've heard that term before, hearing about cryptocurrency. And then the updated block is distributed all across the network. So this is happening on every single computer that's looking into cryptocurrency. And now the transaction is complete. So every single transaction on every single device is happening simultaneously at all hours, 24/7 across the world. And that requires a lot of energy. In order to be really good and mine cryptocurrency, the faster your processors and the larger and more processors you have, the more apt you are to gain cryptocurrency. Therefore, industry has begun building huge huge areas where these processors are stored. this is something I didn't know until 18 months ago, so I find it fascinating. So for those who knew about this, kudos to you. This is the largest, or was the largest, crypto mining site that we had in North America. It's located in Texas, in a small town, Rockdale, Texas. It's 265 acres. They have 30,000 mining rigs is what they call them. So you can see here in the picture, this is just simply huge processors, and they're set up in all of these buildings. I believe this one it's over close to 250,000 square feet of buildings. And these computers and processors are running 24/7, and it requires a huge amount of energy. And so what they like is they like cheap electricity, and they like loose regulations. And that's what they seek in order to determine where they're going to locate their sites. China used to host the largest number and amount of cryptocurrency mining, and China has decided to kick them out. So cryptocurrency mining is now banned in China. Last year, Iran seized the cryptocurrency mining processing equipment from the industries in their country due to the fact that it was hurting their power grid, and during winter months of peak demand. Just recently, like in 2023, a court has overturned and told Iran that they have to return that equipment to the industries. But there's a lot of protests and now regulation being formed in Iran due to the demand on the electrical power grid in that country. Other countries are now enacting similar regulation or even banning of these industries. However, the U.S. has embraced these industries, and Texas, in particular, has declared itself to be very open to the industry. So right now, Texas, the state of Texas, has 1/3 of the entire world's crypto mining industries located within our states. We currently have 28 sites, and there are 31 applications for sites to be built here in Texas. So it's certainly of a concern. This industry was also in New York, because New York at the time had fewer regulations. So if any of you are from that area, had fewer regulations and cheap electricity. And there was, they were close to the Niagara Falls. You also this industry requires a lot of water, because if you can imagine running these industries 24/7, they have to cool those processors and keep them cool. So they're seeking water resources, cheap electrical resources, fewer regulations. California, just last summer, the governor signed a bill bringing in regulations that no crypto mining industries could be built until they were further vetted. So they have stopped issuing the okays for these sites to be built. Texas thought that was a good thing, because now those companies that were not able to build in New York are coming to Texas. Right was just 1 hour south of where I live. They proposed to build a new site. This particular site is going to be on 265 acres. There were protests from citizens. However, these are decisions being made by, of course, our public elected officials. And I can tell you, for the past several months, we have had to apply for a lot of public information to get some of the information from various city councils as to what they have been discussed as these presentations and applications have been made. So very interesting. So here they are on 265 acres. They plan to open the first processor in 2023. They were able to overcome the protests of the citizens. Corsicana is a small town. This is going to be the largest site in the world. They have been approved to utilize 1 gigawatt of electricity. And just to let you know what that means, 1 million households utilize 1 gigawatt of electricity at peak demand. And so this was equal to what the city of Houston, all the homes in the city of Houston would require. So this one site will utilize the same amount of energy as the nearly 1 million homes in Houston, Texas, which is the 4th largest city in the United States. At a time when we are asked and businesses have begun making decisions to decrease their carbon footprint, the crypto mining industry currently uses 0.3% is 0.3% of all greenhouse emissions. And in the state, it's not the state, in the United States, it's 0.8% of all greenhouse emissions. And these aren't their carbon footprint is very similar to the diesel usage by the railroads here in the United States, which is what many of us have been concerned about for years. So this Riot Blockchain is the name of this particular industry that's building that has the large Rockdale, Texas site and is now building the even larger Corsicana, Texas site. They have formed very good relationships with the government. They do a lot of outreach into the community. They promise jobs, but that has actually, once they build them, has actually not shown to be the case. As you can see, most of the work is being done by computers. So the requirement of workers is to oversee that the computers are working and staying cool and doing those types of jobs. But in Texas, we have a power grid that's very different from the rest of the United States. This was very evident because we had a winter storm in 2021 that was unprecedented. Here in Texas, we every now and then drop below freezing, but not very often, and certainly not very long. But in February of 2021, we dropped below freezing. That did not let up for 5 days. And we are not equipped for that kind of long-term freezing weather. 246 individuals in the state died because electricity shut down massively. Millions of Texans were without electricity. And so that, of course, has a huge impact. In the impact, we were very concerned about the vulnerable population, or those who are dependent upon medical equipment that requires electricity. And so we were concerned about, if we have an industry that we are welcoming with open arms that is known to utilize this much energy, and we have a particular power grid that we know has vulnerabilities and has known to have failed when it hits peak demand, and you are adding an industry that is equal to the size of the largest city in Texas as far as energy demands, it seems like it's kind of one of those train wrecks that is about to happen, right? But we have information that we should have some foresight on this as to what we could do. So currently the capacity of the Texas power grid is 85 gigawatts. And that's what we utilized during that winter, which is why it shut down, because we went over. They are trying to increase the capacity, but I will tell you that consumer cost has risen greatly in the last few years in the state of Texas. And our capacity for home medical assistance devices, every time there is a power shutdown, they are at put into a very risky situation. Anyone who is dependent medically on these at-home medical devices that are keeping them alive is when they go for a power shutdown, if they are without power for 2 hours, there is a 43% higher risk that they will die. And so it's very important to have a healthy power industry in order to support what is going on. So this is really just I want to stay on for time, but just talking about the power usage. So you can see in this particular report right here where the trend is definitely, we are making more and more demands on energy, and which is talking about the resources Dr. Ko just mentioned earlier, that we do have a high dependency here in the US on fossil fuels. This is just a little bit about the ERCOT. We are a huge state. Our state is as big as some countries. And so we do have 26 million customers in the state of Texas, and almost all of those customers were without power during the storm. So this was certainly something that was a huge impact on us.
Excuse me, please, you are 2 minutes past.
I'm going to close up then and say that in our last part that let me go to this, that we have had a 10.5% kilowatt increase since June of 21. And that was last December, and we know it's increased then. So this is certainly something that is affecting poverty rates. It's affecting our medically vulnerable, and of course, it's also affecting our environment. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And finally, we're going to have Edmund Merrim. I'm sorry.
No problem, sir. Yeah, Merrim, Edmund Merrim.
Thank you. Please share your screen. You should have the ability at this point.
Okay, hold on. Let me just give me a second, sir.
Sure.
Let me just because it just happened at the last minute, so I didn't know what exactly happened. Let me see. My this thing froze now.
If you would like, you could potentially
I'm trying to locate the file because it just I see miniature. Let me see. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I've been able to locate the file. What do I do next? Did I just click there?
You should be able to, click your file, the PowerPoint.
Okay. I should just click from the C drive or where it is. Just open it up.
Yes, it should open up.
Okay. Okay. I just want to be sure if I'm doing the right thing.
So is Compa support still on our?
You say what?
No, I'm talking.
Still around. Is there anything needed?
Yeah, one of our presenters is having some difficulty sharing their screen.
Okay, I see their screen.
Yeah, my screen is here.
Difficulty opening the file is what it looks like.
I thought I opened the file already.
Oh, okay, then unshare your screen. Close the shared screen.
Yeah, I opened the file already.
Yeah, because you're not sharing that screen apparently.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
stop share, click the stop share. If you'd like to send me that file, I can share it for you, or
Who is speaking? Is it Dr.?
that's Dr. Zuchukwu.
I sent you the file already. In your email.
Why would you send it to me?
I mean, I was looking for help. No person had me on the list, so I was.
Okay, can you stop sharing your screen? Let's stop sharing the screen.
So okay, I should click a pause share. Pause share. Is that what
Stop share. Stop share.
You said pause. Pause share.
Stop share. Stop.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
a red button.
Okay, I've done that, madam.
Okay. And now you can go to click and share it and find that PowerPoint screen that you just opened.
Okay.
Go back to share.
Okay.
Find the PowerPoint screen, click it,
Okay.
and then everybody will see it.
So I should click it or open it.
Click on Zoom share screen. Zoom, go back into your Zoom, share the screen.
Okay.
Let me see if I can locate whatever file you sent me. Probably, find it.
Ah.
Okay, wonderful. Whoa, okay. All right, we can see your screen.
Okay.
Assessing the potentials of cotton land use
Yeah.
trends in Sudan. We cannot read it, but we can see it.
No, I'm sorry. Actually, no. It's just the nature of what is going on here, and I don't want to make any. I don't want to mess up anything here by clicking on the wrong stuff. It's just a simple stuff I'm really doing here.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah.
The time
And I begin
begins.
by introducing myself, Dr. Edmund Merriam from Jackson State University. I'm a full professor of environmental design, and originally from grew up in Southern Mediterranean in Egypt. I mean in Italy, but very close to the region that where Sudan actually originates from, especially the Horn of African side of SSA, the Sub-Saharan African region, because Sudan is a country that happens to be on the crossroads of the Middle East, North Africa, Horn of Africa, and some parts of East Africa as well. So I'm really honored to be, doing a research on Sudan. Somebody might be wondering, why would a guy from with roots in Nigeria, Italy, and Canada be doing something on Sudan? The reasons are not far-fetched. Being a student of African history, I've always been moved. I've always felt excited about studying Sudan. If you look at the name Sudan, what is it all about? Sudan means the land of Black people. So when we were growing up in West Africa, in the 70s and 80s, before we started traveling around the world, we've always been asked about what is the significance of Sudan? What is really the role of Sudan? If you look at the location of Sudan, very close to Egypt, and it used to be part of a greater Egypt in the past, many, many years ago, last century, it was really, really part of Egypt. And then the DNA of that area, happens to be 78% sub-Saharan, even Egypt as well. And the people there are not really, Arabs, but with religion, coming in there, in the 600 ADs, when the Ottoman Turks invaded, they overran they overran Damascus, Jerusalem, and then swept into Cairo, Sudan. So everything about that area culturally completely changed, but that has not in any way diminished my interest in wanting to look into cotton. In fact, cotton to Sudan, cotton is like what cocoa is to Ghana, like what let me see, corn is to Nebraska, and some of the Midwestern states. Actually, you begin to look at it. Actually, so so if you look at the community life of folks in Sudan, I would say that cotton is at the center of community life. Just like I made the same argument from my side in Lower South Nigeria, that cassava, yam, palm oil has always been the center of community life, just like cocoa in Ghana, Ivory Coast, and many neighboring West African nations. So looking into this topic, I think is of interest. I'm not, I didn't dabble into this topic simply because cotton is doing so well now. Cotton used to be at the center before, but all of a sudden, due to volatility in the international marketplace, so many things began to change. Cotton is no longer where it used to be. But what is really happening these days across Sub-Saharan Africa, I can tell from experience in Nigeria, is that in the 1950s and 60s, 50s, 60s actually, palm oil, groundnut used to be the centerpiece of economic policies at that time. They were greatest contributors to the welfare of community in terms of foreign exchange and all that. But they've been there for many years. They've had that role actually, for many years. But with the discovery of oil, there was a U-turn. Government started looking into oil so much and began to collapse subsidies. They began to take subsidies away from from farmers in that area. In the case of Sudan, what exactly happened is that Sudanese government over the years has been looking into several areas. They have several options, given the volatility in the international marketplace. Other challenges was, if you look at Sudan geographically, Sudan is if you look at where Sudan is located, just very close to the desert, actually. Sudan does not have the luxury of folks in East Africa. So they've always had problems with water. with access to water. And then, to piggyback a little bit, I also wanted to mention strategically why cotton. There's something about cotton in the Middle East, which most people don't know. People might be asking why cotton. There's something strategic about cotton in the political power play in that area. Beginning, going back to the 1920s. In the 1920s, because of the proximity of these regions, states in East Africa, North Africa, Egypt, and Sudan, which was Greater Egypt at that time, colonial master Britain decided to apportion about 94-95% of daily water supply in the Nile to Egypt and Sudan. Because of what? Because of cotton. Britain wanted to have access to the Orient, wanted to have access to the market in Far East and Asia. And one of the ways you do that is by diverting water from Lake Victoria, which supplies about 90%, much of the water to the Nile from that area. Then thereby depriving those African nations they were not nations, they were still colonies at that time. They didn't really have the power. Britain made that call on the basis of that, implying that if you are in Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, all those areas, Ethiopia, any water project, for you to initiate any water diversion project like dams, you need permission from Sudan. Why would that happen? Sudan or Egypt, they don't own the water. See, it was just something, it's just a problem that has been hanging out there. In fact, I'm giving you this as a background, actually, as to why you should understand the implications and the significance of today's topic. And what has that led to? It has created tension between Ethiopia. Today, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, because Ethiopia is building a new dam, the Millennium Dam. It's just a Millennium, these project they're putting together, overly controversial, tens of billions of dollars. The great powers have come into play there, Russia, United States, Britain, and others, to diffuse tension. Both countries are ready to go to war, which could be very scary because over 100 million country, folks in Egypt and Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is also a regional power in the Horn of Africa. Then Sudan is on the other side taking cover. Cotton, I know that these issues are due to the reason why you have regional water implications, because if you look at the impacts of what I'm talking about today, cotton production, potential of cotton land use in Sudan, over dependence on water, over mining of water, because Sudan suffers from severe drought. So water is always an issue. So having said that, I want to begin by stating that this study assesses changing cotton land use output in Sudan. We'll be looking into cotton, size of land. You cannot harvest cotton without planting it. You got to know about the land where it is actually being planted. Just like you have over here in Mississippi, Alabama, whether it is in Fresno Valley in California, where people cultivate crops, you have to cultivate them on land, and then with that you go into the output. What is the volume in terms of 1,000 metric tons or pounds? So having said, then in terms of going forward, we decided to bring in terms of methodology, the tools we are using, mostly geographic information system, coming from environmental design. Geology, oil, and natural gas, we tend to use GIS a lot, to showcase how these things are being manifested. So I'm sorry about the miniature level, the small size on the screen, because that's exactly what we are doing. I didn't know I needed to put it in a PowerPoint. If you can bear with me as I break down some of the approaches here, beginning with the mixed-scale methods of GIS and the discrete statistics, and then other things out there. We lay them out in terms of geography, in terms of mapping, especially where the issues are and the challenges Sudan has had over the years. Like recently, as late as 2018, actually, they lost about 80% of their cotton output due to what? Pests. And that altered their projections in terms of fiscal derivation, fiscal sources or their budgets and all that. Those are the kind of things, uncertainties you can never predict. When it comes to depending on one major ash crop like cotton, and then at the same time, they've been experimenting, because that's what people do these days, just like in the United States here. It's like other things we've done here in the States. We found out that much of the thing you eat in the supermarket, most of the goods you put on there, even water, whether it is cotton, whatever they from, actually, they are in 80–90% are genetically modified, just like in oil and natural gas sector in the US. 99, I think over the years, in the past 20 years, 95% of oil and gas produced in the United States comes from fracking, alternative ways. So in the case of Sudan, they've been trying to innovate. They're trying to, I can tell you, spicy up things a little bit with partnerships, in the Orient with China and all those other places. So as at now, cotton activities in the Sudan, production, cultivation, are dominated by GMOs, genetically modified organisms, to enhance productivity output, have ensured that the crops are resistant to diseases, to pests, which is a very big issue, and then also ensure that they're able to resist, to withstand the rigors, the punishment from a desert environment. The desert ecology is always a very big problem to be there, just like Southern California, areas that are so dried up, all that. So it's just an issue. So the emphasis here are on the issues and trends, factors and impacts, and some of the efforts that they've been able to put into place. So we analyze the issues, assess production trends, and then measure the potentials of cotton cultivation, and then also to know the impacts, as I've said before. And as I've also mentioned, cotton is an essential crop in Sudan, just like I said before, Ghana has cocoa and all that. It relies on irrigation. They got to use water. It relies on irrigation, but it's also not planted everywhere. If you look at areas where they plant cotton in the United States, just check something they have in common. The geology of the area, the irrigation, you have to depend on the irrigation, but at the same time also the soil in terms of, in terms of pedology, clay soil or clay soil or silt, depending on the area. If you look at the map of Sudan, mostly around the Red Sea area, the Blue Nile area, and all that. So those are some of the essential, some of the vital things that
All rooms have been reopened.
We apologize for the interruption with the breakout rooms. Hopefully everybody filters back into the room so Dr. Merrim can finish his presentation. So as we wait, we have about 5 more minutes left in our session.
Is Dr. Merrim available to finish his?
I actually do not know. I have not heard from him.
I see his name.
In the participants?
Yes.
Dr. Merrim, are you still there?
So I'm here.
Okay. So
I'm sorry, sir.
No, please don't. So there was
A hiccup.
there was an announcement that there was some issue with Compa's setup of the breakout room, and so it cut off early.
Hi, everybody.
So
this session
if you can, please
goes
finish your presentation. You have
into
about another
lunch,
3 minutes
so
left.
feel free to stay as long as you want, because
Okay,
I've been going in and out of these rooms, and I
okay.
know that you guys have some really interesting things you're talking about.
Okay.
Feel free, but
Yeah.
just know that you have the whole 30 minutes of lunch that before the next session. Thank you.
I just want to make it clear here. Are you listening, Mr. Rivera, Dr. Rivera? Okay, yeah. Just I also wanted to point out that Sudan, is the largest country in Africa, close to 3 million kilometers square. It's huge. So, and then it has over 48 million people. 48 million people. 80 million. It has 80 million of arable land. Arable land, that is cultivable land, but only 20 are utilized. But water is an issue. Water is an issue. It's a different discourse to talk about. Like what I'm saying here today is about hydropolitics of the Nile River. If you read some of my work, Google Edmund Merrim, you see many things we're talking about. Folks who write about these issues are not people like me. They're usually people from Georgetown. They're usually people from Johns Hopkins. But they really have little knowledge about the intricacies, the complexities of what politics of what and the people are all about. When I grew up in Italy, Sudanese people were my roommates, and I know so much about the areas. But this is of particular interest to me because the outcome of this research, I think, from what we know, will pretty much bring cotton into prominence again, so that government will start doing something. Because you have a crop that provides means of livelihood to over 300,000 people. These are ordinary small croppers. 200,000 people, and Sudan is pride about it. And many African nations are beginning now to revive their major cash crops of the 1950s or 60s that put them on the right path when it comes to developmental trajectory in those days during the post-colonial era and the pre-colonial era. So cotton is, I think, has a capacity to make a comeback, stage a comeback in a place like Sudan, actually. In terms of the access of information, we got Sudan's, there were challenges about data. Sudanese government didn't really have anything at it. So it was USDA, and African Development Bank that gave us some of the information, because some of the information we got were written in Arabic. And then some trading companies, over there, there's a state monopoly in products, so they get their own data. But I rely so much on USDA because USDA has an international agricultural division. And we count on that a lot, but they do liaise with fellow ministries or departments in other parts of the world. Anyway, I think since I've run out of time, one of the major things that stood out for me is, for me in terms of result, is that considering the significance and challenges of Sudan, you also know that Sudan is divided right now. So considering the challenge, we kind of found out that cassava land use area opened up with over 300,000 hectares of land to 760,000 from 1960 to 1922. Because we had to do a time series, when we got the data, try to look at the trends and study, and we're able now to map most of the findings. It continued, from that area. And then if you measure why is it important, why is it so vital at that time? From what I just said, 360,000 to 700,000 from 1960 to 2022. To 2022, it pretty much represents about close to 70% of total land area in Sudan. What happened at that time? Because you have to look at the data properly. You got to look at them from 1960 to 22. So they shared, what kind of trends are occurring. The same thing also goes for the production side of it, the output actually. From 1960 to 1985. And then three other cycles, there were three major cycles in place. Where Sudanese cotton production, of over 400, of over 400,000 pounds, or 400,000 pounds actually, accounted for about 56% of all activities over the duration of time we're talking about. So that was intense activities that took place. But that also came exports. Because in as much as you produce cotton, there are also different classes of cotton. Two major types of cotton. They call it the bracat, and one other one actually accounts for 95%. There are classes, there are species, there are breeds of cotton. Not every type of cotton makes it. So two breeds of cotton accounts for about 95% of their exports. And much of the exports, from what we saw, goes to other countries in the world, because Sudan is the leading producer of cotton in Africa. But from what we've seen lately, due to sanctions and all those things that are going on, structural adjustment programs introduced by the IMF, the way it is actually affecting the role of what government can do at home, ability to disburse subsidy, because the way the 300 peasant farmers you see in Sudan, you've seen in Sudan, operate, it's not the way farmers in the United States operate, because in the US it is subsidy, it is subsidized. Just like if you look at the high plains in North Texas, go over there are counties where you can go to, one or two counties, with billions of dollars in that area. One or two counties could, be accounting for the largest number of, subsidy money. I'm talking about in Northern Texas, where we studied as well. You are looking at at an area, as big as, from that area accounts for 45% of all United States agricultural, products, heavily subsidized, where they use lots of money. Lots of money goes out there, and they do shape what happens in the global, in the orbit of international capital when it comes to cotton in Asia, the way they use it. Texas has an influence. What happens in the Northern Plain, do play a role. In the case of Sudan, their option now, because it's a much more small market. Farmers over there don't have the luxury of subsidies. They know. And the state is also not economically viable. It doesn't produce oil like other people. They do rely on other, it doesn't produce oil so much like neighboring countries, just in a few places. Sudan is not as rich as Egypt. It's not as rich as Libya or Algeria. So hard times away some of those so export to countries like India, Turkey, and Egypt tends to help them make up a little bit in terms of turning the fortunes around. In terms of factors, why, what got us there? You have to look at physical environment. Why was there fluctuation over the years? Physical environment, socioeconomic variables, technology, ecological factors, and then impacts like devastation from pests, spike in water use, hazard exposure to biodiversity, because if your planning continues, so you have to interact, your activities will interact with different life forms that are really vulnerable. Land degradation, pollution, and the spray of agrochemicals.
So excuse me, I have to apologize, but they're asking me to end the session because they're getting ready for the next one.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. I'm so sorry for the technical issues that happened this afternoon. But I want to thank everyone for coming and attending the session. Thank you to our presenters. It was very informative. I really appreciate
the
ability to speak to you.
Very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Merriman. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Ms.
for moderating.
You guys have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Dr. Miriam, thank you so much for
you,
working
my
with us. I'm so sorry about
No
what
problem, my sister. No problem, my
Thank you.
sister. Everything's fine, sir. Everything's fine, my sister. No problem, my sister.
Thank you. So you can go to some of the other sessions. Track 1 seems to still be going strong, and they're asking questions. That's the social equity track. There's about 20 people in there or so.
Oh, yes. Also, help do me a favor. Ensure that my presentation, my topic also gets into the program, because it's not.
It's already there now. It's already
Okay.
there. Yeah, take a look at the website or
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm so sorry. I don't even know how that happened. I'm very sorry about that, but it's definitely there now.
Okay. Thank you very much, madam. God bless you.
Thank you.